Hi everyone, welcome to Poisonous People. In this video, we're going to be addressing the question, am I a narcissist? From the concern, I think I'm selfish. Now, when people bring this concern to me, typically they are pretty codependent. So I'm going to spend this video addressing codependent people specifically. And I'm thinking that there are two reasons why somebody who's more codependent might be concerned that they are selfish. So I'm going to address each of those scenarios and then finally end the video with a perspective that I'd like you to consider regardless of which camp you fall into. So let's go with the first scenario. I'm thinking that it's highly likely many of you out there are fearing that you are selfish because somebody accused you of being selfish. So right off the bat, the first thing I would say is you might want to review the video I made titled, Am I a Narcissist? Someone told me I am. Essentially, this is the same thing. Somebody told you you are a narcissist and now you're afraid you're a narcissist. Somebody told you you're selfish and now you're worried that you're selfish. So a lot of the material in that video is going to help, particularly the second half where I talk about the sources of knowledge. When we are worried that something about us is true only because someone else said so, we are relying too heavily on that person's testimony, which is a valid source of knowledge. But there are other sources of knowledge that we can draw upon in order to get to the truth. So the first thing I would say is that you might want to check out that video as a supplement to this one. But the second thing I would say, if you fall into this camp, is that you have, I would say, halfway decent boundaries. Now, you might be shocked that I said that. You might be thinking, no, I have terrible boundaries. Well, I wouldn't go that far. And the reason why I'm telling you that you have halfway decent boundaries is because you had to have said no in the first place in order for that person to then tell you you're selfish. Right? So somewhere inside, you had the instincts, you had the insight, you had the gut reaction that you should say no, and you did. And at some point in that moment, you felt like this was the right thing to say. So you were okay with saying no. It wasn't until you got the reaction of the other person that you started doubting yourself and thinking that you're selfish. So you are halfway there. You know how to say no. What you need to practice is sticking to that no and not allowing that person to manipulate you or guilt you into changing your no into yes. Now, that's more complex than I can explain in one video. That's the kind of thing that I would address with somebody in therapy. But let me just put it out there that that would be your goal in boundary setting, is to stick to your no. The second thing I would advise people that fall into this camp is to get more clarity as far as what entitlement is versus a sense of entitlement. Most of the time, people who are screaming at you, saying you are selfish, are suffering from a sense of entitlement, which means they aren't actually entitled to the thing that they are expecting of you. Now, on the other hand, it might be entirely reasonable, whatever the person's asking, and they might actually be entitled to the thing they're asking for, but that doesn't mean that you are obligated to fulfill that need. So those are just some things that you might want to think about. Now I want to address people in the second camp, and these are the people who never said no. These are the people who openly said yes to somebody because they felt like they would be selfish not to. So nobody accused you of being selfish. You just felt really uncomfortable. You felt really guilty inside. And when you were asked to do whatever it was, you said yes. And now you're stuck doing this thing that you don't want to do because you were afraid what would happen if you said no. Well, the first thing I would point out is that either way, you've been made to feel bad. Only in this case, you took that privilege away from someone else and you're doing it to yourself. You're calling yourself selfish. Practice saying no. And if somebody reacts that way, if somebody says you're selfish, what difference does it make if that person says you're selfish versus your own inner voice? Either way, you're being accused of being selfish. So that's the first thing I want to point out to you. The second thing I would like you to think about is that there is such a thing as being too generous or too selfless. We tend to look at selfishness as a very negative quality, and let's be honest, it is. But the answer is not to go completely in the opposite direction and be super duper duper unselfish, because that can be equally as toxic. Many of you can relate to what I'm saying, because when you are so selfless, it actually makes your life chaotic. And that's where things are in disorder. Doesn't mean you have a disorder, but I will say that either extreme is not a good thing. We want to aim for balance. So if you are being so selfless to the point where you're pathologically selfless, there are certain disorders that would describe your situation. Again, I'm not diagnosing. I'm not even going to mention what those disorders are, but I'm just trying to give you something to think about, just to get you started on a different way of looking at this. That being selfless, 100% selfless, is not the answer to undoing this idea that you are selfish. So that's what I have to say for people in that camp. Now, the final thing that I want to say to all of you out there is that behavior is temporary, and it's not an indicator of who we are. Our behavior is not always a good measuring stick to judge our whole identity. It's not until behavior becomes a pattern that we can start to judge someone's character and identity on their behavior. But by and large, behavior is temporary. So as soon as you stop doing the behavior, we can't say that you are your behavior. And this is why I love role theory so much, because role theory teaches that the more roles that we play, the more healthy we are. When somebody is hell-bent on being selfless, or they want to avoid being selfish, they tend to get locked into a role that is the opposite of that. It becomes very exhausting to live your life stuck in one role. Just ask any mother who has young children under the age of 5. Being mommy 24/7 is exhausting. This is why mommy likes to have a break and go out and talk to the adults over dinner sometime. It's the same thing when you're codependent. This is exhausting, and you don't need to be this selfless person all the time in order for your character to be intact. So let me give you what I call the waitress example. When I was in my late teens and early 20s, I worked as a waitress in a restaurant. That was one of my roles. Now, I did not work every single day. On my days off, I I stopped the behavior of waitressing. I was not waiting on tables, but my identity as a waitress didn't disappear simply because I wasn't waiting tables that day. I was still a waitress. Likewise, when I was at work and I was on a shift, I wasn't assigned to the entire restaurant. I was only given a small section of tables, which was referred to as my section or my station. My only responsibility was to wait on the tables in that section. People in the other section would say, "Oh, miss, could I have another Diet Coke?" Now, I am a waitress and that is my job, but it's not my job to wait on those people. So I have a decision to make. I can say, "Sure, I'll get that for you," and give them the Diet Coke. And sometimes that's what I did. I was going to get a Diet Coke for my table, might as well get a Diet Coke for this guy as well. But sometimes I was too busy, and because it wasn't my responsibility, I would tell that person, "I'll let your waiter know." And I would send the appropriate waiter over to that table because I can't be expected to wait on every single table in the restaurant. That doesn't mean I'm less of a waitress. It doesn't mean that I ceased being a waitress. I was still a waitress even though I didn't wait on like 90% of the tables in that restaurant. I couldn't have, even if I wanted to. And the same thing applies to roles like caretaker. You're still a caretaker if you don't take care of everyone. If you're taking care of your sick grandfather and you cannot take care of your sick friend, it doesn't mean you are no longer a caretaker. You are taking care of somebody. And when you go home for the evening or you go to sleep at night, you're no longer literally caretaking, but you're still a caretaker for your grandfather. So I want you to think about that when you set boundaries and you say no to people, it's not an attack on your identity as a good, loyal, faithful, dependable person. You are still a good, loyal, faithful, dependable person no matter what the other person says. It's okay to say no because you're still the person that you were before you said no. It's just a matter of, I'm not able to do this particular thing. So I hope that this helps you kind of feel a little bit more at ease with the idea that other people think you're selfish. I'm Jen Guerriero, and this is Poisonous People. Thanks for watching.